What if I told you that one of the greatest cities on Earth was once dismissed as nothing more than a swamp? A muddy, mosquito-filled stretch of land that experts believed would never become anything significant. And yet today that same place rises in steel and glass, its skyline cutting sharply into the sky. This is the untold story of Chicago. Long before the skyscrapers, before the roar of the elevated trains and the glow of city lights, this land was home to native nations, including the Potawatomi, who understood its power. The Chicago River was more than water. It was a gateway, a natural link between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River system, a strategic corridor through the heart of North America. In 1779, a trader of African and Caribbean descent named Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable built a home here. Decades before Chicago was officially recognized as a city, he saw potential where others saw wilderness. His trading post quietly became the foundation of something far greater. A black pioneer at the origin of one of America's largest cities, and a detail too often overlooked. By 1837, Chicago was incorporated as a city with just over 4,000 residents. Within a few decades, it exploded in growth. Railroads converged here like arteries feeding a powerful heart. Grain from the Midwest, lumber from the North, cattle from the plains, everything passed through Chicago. It became the backbone of American commerce. But growth came with risk. In October 1871, after months of dry weather and a city built largely of wood, a small fire began on the west side. The legend blames a cow kicking over a lantern, but historians have long questioned that story. What cannot be questioned is the devastation that followed. The Great Chicago Fire raged for nearly 2 days, destroying more than 17,000 buildings and leaving over 100,000 people homeless. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The city's heart was reduced to ash. Imagine standing by Lake Michigan, watching everything you knew disappear in smoke. And yet, what happened next changed architecture forever. Instead of retreating, Chicago rebuilt with ambition. Architects and engineers used the tragedy as a turning point. Steel frame construction advanced rapidly. Elevators made height practical. In 1885, the home insurance building rose 10 stories high, widely considered the world's first skyscraper. The city that burned decided to touch the sky. Then came 1893. The World's Columbian Exposition transformed Chicago into the dazzling white city, glowing with electric lights at a scale many Americans had never seen before. It felt like stepping into the future. Innovation, beauty, optimism. But history in Chicago is never simple. Just miles away from the fairgrounds, Holmes operated what would later be known as the Murder Castle. While millions celebrated progress and possibility, darkness hid in plain sight. It was a chilling contrast, and brilliance and horror existing side by side. Chicago has always carried light and shadow together. As the 20th century began, waves of immigrants reshaped the city. Irish, Italian, Polish, and Jewish communities built neighborhoods rich with culture and resilience. Then came the Great Migration. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved north seeking opportunity and escape from Southern oppression. Chicago became a beacon of hope. But hope met harsh reality. Segregation hardened neighborhoods into invisible borders. In 1919, racial tensions erupted after a black teenager drifted across an unofficial line in Lake Michigan and was attacked. The violence that followed became one of the deadliest race riots in American history. Chicago's divisions were exposed for the nation to see. Yet from struggle came extraordinary culture. In the South Side's crowded apartments and smoky clubs, blues music evolved into something electric. Muddy waters amplified the Delta sound. Gospel choirs filled churches with thunder. Writers and poets added new voices to American literature. Chicago became a cultural powerhouse, shaping the nation's rhythm. Then Prohibition arrived. The 1920s stamped Chicago's name into global headlines. Al Capone, speakeasies, bootlegging empires, and the St. Valentine's Day massacre created a reputation that still lingers today. But beneath the sensational crime stories were journalists, reformers, and citizens fighting corruption. Chicago was not just gangsters. It was a city wrestling with its own power. When factories declined and the stockyards closed in the mid-20th century, Chicago faced another crisis. Jobs vanished. Entire neighborhoods struggled. Yet once again, reinvention followed hardship. The skyline continued to evolve. In 1973, the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower, became the tallest building in the world. To understand modern Chicago, you have to understand its contradictions. On one side, it's shimmering architecture, lakefront sunsets, and world-class museums. On the other, it's a city still wrestling with inequality shaped decades ago. Chicago carries both pride and pressure in equal measure. In 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., unrest shook Chicago's west side. Buildings burned once more, not from accident, but from anger and grief. That same year, the Democratic National Convention turned downtown into a scene broadcast across the world. Clashes between protesters and police that cemented Chicago's image as tough and unfiltered. But cities are not frozen in their hardest moments. In the decades that followed, former industrial corridors transformed into thriving neighborhoods. Old warehouses became art spaces. The once polluted riverfront turned into a lively promenade. Millennium Park rose where rail yards once dominated. Chicago reinvented itself again. Yet the deeper challenge remained. Segregation patterns drawn nearly a century earlier continued shaping opportunity. Housing, schools, income, the lines were no longer invisible, they were structural. The question facing Chicago was no longer how to rebuild buildings, but how to rebuild systems. Still, the city's influence never slowed. Barack Obama's political journey began here, organizing communities on the South Side before rising to the presidency. Chicago shaped his philosophy of grassroots engagement and collective action. The city's lessons echoed all the way to the White House. Music continued evolving too. In underground clubs during the 1980s, Black and Latino DJs experimented with drum machines and rhythm, giving birth to house music. What began in Chicago spread across continents, influencing global dance culture. The beat of Chicago traveled farther than any train line ever could. Sports brought another wave of identity. The Chicago Bulls' dominance in the 1990s under Michael Jordan was more than athletic success. 6 championships turned the team into a global phenomenon. For many, it symbolized excellence born from a city often underestimated. But perhaps the most overlooked truth about Chicago is not found in politics, music, or sports. It's found in its people. It's the teacher who refuses to give up on her classroom, the small business owner reopening after economic hardship, the immigrant family arriving with nothing but belief in opportunity. Chicago survives because ordinary people choose to stay, to build, and to believe. Remember that this entire city was built on marshland. Engineers had to drive massive timber piles deep into unstable ground just to support its weight. That fragile foundation could have limited it. Instead, it became a metaphor. Chicago was never supposed to stand this tall, and yet it does. The skyline at sunset is not just beautiful, it's defiant. Every beam of steel represents resilience. Every neighborhood carries stories of challenge and renewal. Even the river flowing through downtown is a reminder of bold decisions that changed the city's fate. When people speak of Chicago, they often focus on headlines, crime, cold winters, political drama. But beneath those headlines lies a deeper narrative. A city started by a visionary trader, a city nearly erased by fire, a city that pioneered the skyscraper, a city that shaped American music, politics, and culture. Chicago is not perfect. It never has been. It is a city of tension and triumph, scars and skyscrapers, setbacks and stubborn hope. Perhaps that is why its story matters so much. Because Chicago teaches something universal. Resilience is not about avoiding hardship. It is about deciding again and again to rise after it. From swamp to ashes to skyline, Chicago stands as proof that even the most unlikely foundations can hold something extraordinary. And its story is still being written